So there's breaking news that has just come out maybe 20, 30 minutes ago. Just check my volume. Good. Um, Jeremy Corbyn, former leader of the Labour Party, and one of those people who, I full throatedly support it and still full throatedly support, even though I consider him, on the weak side. But his intentions were always on point. Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended from the Labour Party. And again, former leader of the Labour Party, like, 8 months ago or 6 months ago, is now no more. That's astonishing. More astonishing is the reason why he's suspended. A report came out, the UK's Equity and Human Rights Commission. That report found that Labour was responsible for unlawful acts of harassment and discrimination linked to anti-Semitism, and this is according to the BBC. The report found a culture within the party at which, at best, did not do enough to prevent anti-Semitism, and at worst, could be seen to accept it. It also found that Corbyn's office had, quote, politically interfered, unquote, on 23 separate occasions regarding anti-Semitism complaints. Now, when this report was released, Corbyn, who for the longest time, to my chagrin, accepted this position that somehow Labour was ensconced in anti-Semitism, and he himself in particular was somehow anti-Semitic. The man is the least racist person on the planet. And that guy is supposedly anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist. Yes. But those are different things. Those are monstrously different things. Corbyn responded to this in the way you would expect a person who's not guilty of a crime that will respond to being indicted by the crime. This is bullshit. He didn't say that. He said this. Basically, the party processes he inherited were, quote, fit to purposes. Reform was stalled by obstructive party bureaucracy. He said he regrets that the change was too slow of a problem, but that it was dramatically overstated. So I'll just read it. So this is anyone claiming there's no anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is wrong. Of course there is, and there is throughout society, and sometimes it's voiced by people who think of themselves as on the left. Jewish members of our party and within the wider community were right to expect us to deal with it, and I regret that it took longer to deal or to deliver the change than it should. One anti-Semite is one too many, but the scale of the problem was dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside the party. That's flat, true. As well as by much of the media. The combination hurt Jewish people and must never be repeated. He is right. But you must understand, if you make the argument that says there is anti-Semitism in Labour, but you can also say, well, there's anti-Semitism in Conservative Party too, because these people are just part of society and those people are going to be... Okay, fair enough. Then you're just talking about a probabilistic just distribution of people who may be a particular way. But the media acted as if Corbyn himself and Labour itself was somehow uniquely anti-Semitic. What Labour was critical of Israel. And the conflation between Israel as a state and as the way a state behaves in horrible ways. I mean, for God's sake, it's an open-air ghetto. Now, for Israel to behave in that way and to indict that country, they still scream anti-Semitism, despite the fact that you're talking about a state. Benjamin Netanyahu often conflates these things, this idea of a Zionist versus the notion of Israel as a country. It is just the country. Call it whatever you want, Jewish state, whatever. It is just a country. it's no different than any other country. And in the same way that country can do things that are horrific and barbaric, they can be criticized for doing so. In Corbyn's case, that opened him up to attacks of anti-Semitism, that his party and members of his party wielded that against him because they hated his guts. They hate him in a way that the Democrats hate Sanders. He is a reflection of what they are not, but what they say they are. And because he is that way, standing right beside him, they look weaker for it. My point is that the labor that Corbyn espouses that he wants, the labor that Corbyn was pushing for, was one that was more fair, more earnest in regards to equity, in regards to people and the money that they get in their pocket. And from the standpoint of anti-racist, by definition almost, Zionism is just fascism by another name. I mean, for God's sake, this is not an indictment of the individuals of a particular country. This is an indictment of the foreign policy of a particular country. They attacked him, and they found that as a weak point. And he had people on both sides of the political spectrum that hated his guts and was willing to wield that against him, even though there was no there there. There was no there there. It was wildly inflated in order to attack him in this way. And again, like I said, this is kind of like the Sanders thing in the United States. We used to have FDR Democrats in the States. FDR Democrats was eventually ran out by by third way Democrats. And those third way Democrats hated the left more than they hated Republicans. Because the fact of the matter is, they agree for the most part with the way the world is, with modern gradients on it. And having Republicans to be maniacs allowed them to look less insane, despite the fact that the policy positions that they take are only ticks to the left of the Republicans. That's assuming that's even a tick to the left. I mean, if you get into foreign policy at this point, Democrats are hawks. I'm making the point that if you are calling yourself on the left and you have somebody who's standing there that is willing to offer benefits, meaning willing to ensure that that person gets health care, willing to ensure that person can go to school, willing to ensure that the wages go up, willing to ensure that taxes go up on the rich. Well, you have two parties that are ensconced in money. And those two parties are going to fight like hell to keep that system the way it is. And if you have somebody like a Corbyn or somebody like a Sanders, those people are trying to change fundamentally the way that system works and tilt it in the interests of the poor and middle class. That's the fight. It's one of ideology. The weapons that they're using for this just so happen to be also bluntly ideological weapons. And in this case, anti-Semitism being the main case. Yes, it was wildly blown out of proportion, and anybody that's being honest could see it. But this is politics. Honesty doesn't entirely apply. And unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn accepted the basic framing going back when he was in office, meaning these anti-Semitism charges were leveled at him. And he basically accepted the framing of the argument that was availed against him. And so instead of him able to pivot, instead of him able to push back, instead of him saying, "Oh, I don't accept that," and giving it, he basically said, "Yes, we're trying to stamp out anti-Semitism." And he accepted that nonsense. And now that he accepted that nonsense, he didn't even want to speak up for Chris Williamson. Now, they came for him. They came for him. And after he put out and said this was dramatically overstated for political reasons, he was kicked out or very least suspended from the party. He said he was going to fight this, strenuously fight this suspension. But Starmer, that lackey that he kept with him for all that time, is now the one to basically kick him. He kept Starmer around all that time, and Starmer was working behind the scenes to fuck him over. And now Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party, is now out the party. The question becomes, what happens now? What happens now? Think for the moment of all those people that joined Labour. All of those people, millions, joined Labour because of Corbyn. Because of Corbyn. And he might not have won those two elections, or he might have lost in those two elections. But in the first election against Theresa May, he swelled the numbers of Labour. And he blew the numbers of Labour up to the point of being near Blair. Thing is, the problem is Brexit. Brexit skews politics in the country, because at that point it becomes, the NHS is important, increasing our wages is important, taxing the rich is important, getting our hands on the railroads is important, we need to control these vital services. Yes, agreed, 1,000%. But what about Brexit? What's your position on Brexit? People like Starmer kept his position on Brexit weird. What I mean by that is Starmer is a Remainer. And many of those people that he had in his back bench were Remainers, or the front bench were Remainers. Unfortunately, because those people were Remainers, he, who is a Eurosceptic at heart, is stuck in this weird position where he didn't take a strenuous position. He didn't take a strong position on it. He didn't take a position like Boris Johnson saying, I'm fighting for the public, and use that to rail against elements of his party that didn't necessarily agree with the Eurosceptic position, or, for that matter, agree with the referendum as in general. He didn't do that. He didn't take a strong, strenuous approach. I'm fighting for the public. I'm fighting for Britain. That's why I'm going to defend the referendum. He would have been far better off, infinitely better off, if he would have just mirrored Boris Johnson. He would have been infinitely better off from the standpoint of the polling, because the public would have, at the very least, been able to understand his position. Think for the moment what Joe Biden did. Think what Joe Biden did. When Joe Biden thought he was winning, and meaning in the primary or either in the general election, Joe Biden faded out of existence. Just faded out the woodwork. When Trump would say something, oh, this guy's a Bernie guy, he would come out and he would say, I'm not like Bernie Sanders. I beat the socialists. I beat the socialists. And then he'll trot out a bunch of Republicans and he'll fade back into the woodwork. Trump would say, he's soft on cops. And he would come out, I want to give the cops $500 million. And he chooses Kamala Harris, who, again, was a cop. Fades back. His policy at that point, because he thought he was ahead, was just to blunt attacks. I just want to balance. Because on balance, I believe I win. I don't need to disrupt it. I don't need to get into a fight. I don't need to get into a brawl. I don't need to get into a fleeing match. Nope. Balance. That's all I want. I'm not going to offer anything real. I'm not going to offer anything tangible. I'm going to offer myself against him and let it be mano a mano and let the public choose between these two. Nothing to upset the apple cart. My point is, there's something to be said for knowing what the main issue is, the fight over. And in the case of Brexit, the issue was Brexit. Nothing else. Yes, you can make the argument that Boris Johnson is going to try to sell off the NHS if you're also making an argument that you are for Brexit. Because if you don't, he's going to scream freedom and democracy, and these guys aren't living up to the referendum. And you are going to have to tell the public that your Brexit position is that you are going to go to the European Union, you're going to work out another deal, meaning you're going to send, Starmer, people who didn't agree with Brexit, you're going to send those people to go negotiate a deal. After the other deal had been negotiated and the EU said they weren't going to negotiate it anymore. And those people, after they get a deal, they're going to bring it back and we're going to put it up for a vote. And the public can say, okay, do you want this crappy deal that you know is going to be crappy? Or do you want to just stay? Or do you want to leave? Meaning people at that point realize he wants to dance between raindrops. And at the end of the day, we have no idea where he stands on Brexit. And he even got to the point of being so weak where he said, I'm not even going to push one way or the other on this. I'm just going to be neutral. How are you going to be neutral? You're the prime minister. If you can think of the weakest possible position an individual can take in politics, right there, it was that. Leader of the opposition saying, I'm not going to take a push. And the biggest thing that's happened in a generation to the UK. Astonishing. But part and parcel to the reason for that was this guy, Starmer, and the people who were behind him who were anti-Brexit, despite the referendum and despite Labour proclamations that they were going to attend to the referendum. If you have a position of balance with Boris Johnson on the notion of a referendum, then you can make the argument that he is going to try to sell off the NHS. Because at that point, at the very least, you're balanced. This is something else to disrupt a balance from the standpoint of his side and his position on it. The anti-Semitism thing was just one of the attacks that was being leveled against him by elements of the party that did not agree, and like I said, that hated the idea that somebody on the left was able to take power in the UK. What is going to happen to all those Labour members that were Corbynites? Those disaffected Labour members, each and every one of them should leave. Every last one of them should leave. It should be exactly just like it is in the United States. What should happen? Where lefties wake up and realize that their future is not in that party in the way that the party is organized and structured. And while you don't necessarily have the capacity to get your guy in on that party, you do have the capacity to make them lose. Now, the rub here is in the UK, it's a parliamentary system, and so they do have the capacity to start new parties. It's not like in the States. That brick of being able to make them lose is juxtaposed against this notion of you being able to start something new. Or you fight for the party. Pick and choose, right? You were able to get somebody in to take charge of the party that was from Labour. So the question becomes, what is the political leverage that the left, from standpoint of the UK, the real left, has in order to articulate their will in regards to if they do something to Corbyn? If you have no ability to add a tat for that tit, then you will be subordinated to whatever whims they have at their disposal. This is a broad shot. I mean, this is broadside. For God's sake, they took out the leader of the left at this point from the standpoint of the UK and somebody who was able to get to major prominence. They took him out for suspension. That's astonishing. And there should be consequences for that from the standpoint of the Corbynites in the UK. Question is, what is it? But that should have consequences. And what I mean political consequences. Like either civil war in the party itself. And the question becomes, what does that look like? Look, I'm one of those people who thought Corbyn should have cleaned house and the people around him should have reflected him and his ideas and what he wanted to accomplish. He had people behind him that wasn't that way. And to be fair, look, I don't live in the UK, so, take this with a grain of salt. But how it turned out was not favorable to his interests. And if it didn't turn out favorable to his interests, perhaps there was something about the pursuit that was off. And in the very specific case of Brexit, it was Brexit. Boris Johnson was a much stronger orator, a much better politician in that case than Theresa May. And Corbyn's best chance was against May. But even against Johnson, it didn't necessarily mean that he had zero chances. It just meant that he had zero chances under the argument that he was making, which was basically not taking a position on Brexit. It killed him. But that was the point. Hence, my point is people like Starmer. Wow, astonishing. I was waiting to try to see what George Galloway said about this, but I haven't seen anything from him yet. I think he posted a video or something, but I haven't seen him tweeting too much about it. But Jeremy Corbyn suspended from the party he led just a few months ago. Like, share,